The SEALs were surrounded, and they knew it. Dust and smoke clung to the jagged rocks around them like a suffocating veil, and the echoes of gunfire ricocheted through the valley. Every direction was danger. Every shadow felt like the barrel of a rifle aimed at their backs. Then, just as despair began to creep into their thoughts, a single shot rang out from the ridge they thought was clear. The bullet cracked through the chaos like thunder in silence, and for a heartbeat, every fighter on that mountainside froze. The sound hadn't come from the enemy, it had come from above. The ridge was supposed to be secure, scouted and cleared hours before. Yet now, there was someone up there. And that shot had just changed everything. Lieutenant Mark Harrison, the team leader, pressed his back against a boulder as dirt exploded inches from his head. His men were pinned, their comms filled with overlapping shouts, coordinates, ammo counts, fragments of fear slipping past their training. He clenched his jaw, forcing calm into his voice. Hold positions. We're not done yet. But in his gut, Mark knew how bad it was. Their mission had already gone sideways. What was supposed to be a quick extraction of a high-value target had turned into an ambush laid with precision. Someone had leaked their approach. Someone had known exactly where they'd be. And now, with dwindling ammo and the enemy closing in, it looked like they might not make it back. Then came another shot, clean, surgical. It dropped an enemy machine gunner whose position had nearly flanked the SEALs. One shot, one kill. The kind of precision only a true sniper could deliver. "Who the hell is that?" muttered Ramirez, the youngest of the team, barely 22 and on his first deployment. Nobody answered, because none of them knew. Minutes stretched like hours as the unseen shooter above began to change the flow of battle. Every time the enemy pressed, a shot cracked out. Every time a heavy gun mounted, it was silenced. The sniper wasn't spraying bullets. They were choosing carefully, deliberately, forcing the ambush to collapse one body at a time. Still, the enemy was relentless. And even with the mysterious sniper buying them breathing room, the SEALs were bleeding, both in strength and spirit. Chief Petty Officer Dalton, the oldest in the group, had taken a hit to the leg but refused to stop firing. Sweat ran down his face as he grunted through the pain, whispering a mantra to himself, "Not today. Not like this." The fight raged for what felt like eternity. Finally, the tide broke. The gunfire thinned, the shouts of the enemy fading into the wind. Silence fell heavy across the ridge and valley. The SEALs, battered and scarred, finally had a chance to breathe. But there was still one question that burned in their minds. Mark signaled two men to cover him and slowly stepped out into the open, his rifle lowered but ready. He craned his neck toward the ridge above. At first, he saw nothing. Then, movement. A figure emerging against the skyline, tall, deliberate, and holding a long rifle with calm authority. When the figure drew closer, the SEALs' disbelief only deepened. It wasn't one of theirs. Not part of the mission, not part of their team. The sniper finally reached the edge of the slope and looked down at them. A woman. She wore the rugged camouflage of a local fighter, her face streaked with dust and grit, but her eyes, those sharp, unflinching eyes, told the story of someone who had seen war for far too long. "Area's clear," she said in accented English, her voice steady, like she had simply taken a walk in the park. The SEALs exchanged stunned looks. Ramirez was the first to break the silence. You saved our asses." The woman gave the faintest of nods, adjusting the strap of her rifle. "My village is down there," she said, pointing past the valley. "If you die here, they come for us next. I don't fight for you. I fight for them." Her words carried no malice, only truth. She hadn't come to be a hero. She hadn't come for gratitude. She had come because the survival of her people depended on stopping the same men who had tried to kill the SEALs. Mark met her eyes, searching for something to say. What could he offer to someone who had just saved their lives, not for duty, not for country, but for love of her home? Finally, he managed, "Then we owe you more than we can repay." She gave a faint smile. One of those fleeting, almost invisible smiles that vanish before you're sure they existed. Then she turned and walked back toward the ridge, disappearing into the rocks without another word. The SEALs were left standing in silence, the smoke of battle still drifting around them. Each of them carried scars from that day, both physical and unseen, but they also carried a new truth. They weren't invincible. They weren't always the saviors. Sometimes, survival depended on the courage of a stranger who had everything to lose. Back at base, the debrief was clinical, as always. Reports filed, casualties tallied, but in the quiet moments after, when the team sat together, they spoke not of the ambush, not of the fear, but of the sniper on the ridge. She didn't just save us, Dalton said, his voice low but sure. She reminded us what we're really fighting for. Not medals, not orders, people, families, lives. And that was the truth they carried forward. Because in the darkest hour, when they were surrounded and ready to fall, it wasn't strength alone that saved them. It was the single shot from a ridge they thought was clear, and the unshakable will of someone who refused to let evil take her home. The SEALs were surrounded. Then a single shot rang out from the ridge they thought was clear. Part 2. Night fell hard over the valley, wrapping the jagged rocks in shadows as cold as the silence left after the battle. The SEALs huddled in a shallow cave, their bodies battered, their minds racing with the echo of the gunfire they'd barely survived. Each man knew the mission had gone far beyond its plan. And each man couldn't stop thinking of her, the mysterious sniper who had saved them, then vanished back into the mountains like a ghost. Lieutenant Mark Harrison sat against the wall, staring at the dim glow of the tactical map on his tablet. The extraction point was still a day's march away, and their comms were patchy at best. Reinforcements weren't coming. His men were bruised, hungry, and running low on ammo. And if the ambush had taught him anything, it was that the enemy knew their every move. "We're walking into another trap," Dalton growled, adjusting the tourniquet on his wounded leg. He winced but kept his voice steady. "They won't let us reach that bird alive." Ramirez, the youngest, shifted nervously. "What about her? The sniper. She knew the terrain. She could." He trailed off, uncertain if he was clinging to false hope. Mark considered the thought. It was dangerous to trust someone outside the chain of command, someone whose loyalties weren't guaranteed. But she hadn't hesitated to save them. And she hadn't asked for anything in return. That kind of courage wasn't easy to ignore. As if the mountains themselves had been listening, a faint crunch of boots on gravel broke the night. Instantly, rifles were up, safeties off, fingers tight on triggers. From the shadows emerged the same woman, calm, deliberate, her rifle slung across her back. The firelight from their small stove flickered against her face, revealing exhaustion hidden beneath the iron resolve of her eyes. "You're not safe here," she said without preamble. "They'll come again at dawn." For a moment, the SEALs just stared, unsure whether to feel relief or suspicion. Finally, Mark lowered his rifle. "Why are you here?" She looked at him with quiet conviction. "Because if you die, they will not stop at your bodies. They will burn villages, take children, destroy everything. My people cannot fight them alone. But you," her gaze swept across the men, lingering on Dalton's bandaged leg. "You need me as much as I need you." The weight of her words silenced them. She was no mercenary, no soldier of fortune. She was a protector. Mark nodded. "Then help us get to the extraction point. We'll take you with us. You'll be safe." But she shook her head. "My place is here. I will not leave them. I only walk with you until you no longer need me." It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was what he respected. The march began before dawn, every step a gamble between survival and discovery. The sniper, her name, they finally learned, was Amina, moved with the grace of someone born to the mountains. She led them through goat trails invisible to the untrained eye, across ridges that seemed impossible to climb, and around enemy patrols that would have ended the team if not for her instincts. At one point, when an enemy drone buzzed overhead, she pulled Ramirez down into a dry riverbed, covering him with her own body until it passed. "You move too loudly," she whispered with a hint of a smile. For the first time since the ambush, the boyish SEAL let out a nervous laugh. But their journey was not without cost. Twice, they were forced to fight. And twice, Amina's rifle spoke before the enemy could bring their numbers to bear. She wasn't reckless. She was patient, each shot a decision, each kill a weight she carried silently. As the days wore on, the bond between the SEALs and Amina deepened. She told them fragments of her story by the fire at night, about her younger brother, taken by the same militants they were hunting, about her father, who had taught her to shoot by lining tin cans on a fence. Every word carried sorrow, but also strength. Ramirez listened like a son. Dalton treated her like a comrade. And Mark couldn't help but wonder if fate had led them into that valley, not for a failed mission, but to meet her. On the third night, the final test came. The enemy caught their trail, surrounding them once again at the edge of a ravine. Tracer rounds lit up the darkness, cutting through trees and stone. The SEALs returned fire, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and too exposed. Mark knew it in his bones. This was the end. Then Amina climbed higher up the ravine wall, her silhouette cutting against the moon. She didn't wait for permission. Didn't wait for thanks. She simply shouldered her rifle and began firing, each shot shifting the tide, each second she bought pulling the SEALs closer to survival. But the enemy noticed her too. And the counterfire was merciless. "Cover her," Mark shouted, his chest tight with dread. They fired with everything they had, but she was too far, too exposed. A flash lit the rocks near her, and she stumbled. For a heartbeat, the team thought she had fallen. But then, with the last of her strength, she steadied her aim and dropped the enemy leader with one perfect shot. The ambush broke. The enemy scattered. The silence returned. When the SEALs reached her, Amina was lying against the rocks, her breath shallow, blood staining her side. She met Mark's eyes, calm even as her life slipped away. "You are free," she whispered. "Go. Tell them. We fought." Mark grasped her hand, his throat burning with words he couldn't say. For the first time, he felt powerless. Not as a leader, not as a SEAL, but as a man watching a warrior give everything for something greater than herself. By the time the sun rose, she was gone. Days later, when the SEALs finally reached extraction and returned to base, the mission report recorded the ambush, the casualties, the narrow escape. But within the team, the story was different. They spoke of Amina, of her courage, her sacrifice, her unwillingness to run when everything was against her. And they carried her name with them, engraved not on medals or official records, but in their hearts. Ramirez etched a mark on his rifle stock for her. Dalton whispered her name before every mission. And Mark told her story to every new operator who thought war was just tactics and weapons. Because the truth was this: the SEALs had been surrounded, and they had survived. But not because of their training. Not because of their gear. They survived because, on a ridge they thought was clear, stood a woman who refused to let evil claim one more life. And her single shot became the echo that carried them home.